E te whānau o planting seeds, tēnei te reo, o te aroha tēnei te reo te mihi, kia koutou, e whakarongo mai ana, e mātaki mai ana, I tēnei wā. Really excited for this kōrero, for this wānanga, and someone who has come on the radar, someone who is doing meaningful mahi with our rangatahi, public speaker, someone who has a heart for those who have perhaps similar stories to his own, and really looking forward to that story coming out, because in the short moments that we've just had getting to know each other, there's already a warmth, there's already energy being reciprocated, and I didn't want to just be a hamu with all of that, so we're here, kia koe hoa nau mai ki tēnei kaupapa, kei te pēhea koe tēnei wā.
Ki te tino ora I tēnei wā tonu. Ai, nōku te waimari e ki te tai mai, aha ko te taku tai tōmuri mai ki tō kainga. Ai, he āhua. I te wai e taraiwa ana au ki te tā o te tātai o hope. I te wakaro au, me te mi aro o ke kātai, te haerenga, wakatau Māori o tērā, mai tauranga ki tēnei wai. Bro, yeah, beautiful to be here today. Thank you for your warm welcome.
Tāhua rawa atu. Whakamohio mai ki te whānau o planting seeds. Let everybody know, bro, ko wai koe, no hea koe.
Tēnā koe. O tēnā koutou ngā kai mātake, ngā kai wakaronga no oke. Ko wai tēnei, he uri tēnei no ngā tiapa, no ngā tiruanui e te tau tōku pāpā. E mokopuna a au. O turi I takatoa e hiraro I te manga tito I o taranaki tū te atu te pō. Ai, I tōku mamata. He mokopuna anō o te ariki o te heuheu. Ko ngā titu ware toa tuku iwi I tērā taa. Ai, ko Jase tōku ingoa.
Tēnā koe, Jase. Where is home for you and where did you grow up? Let's start there with our kōrero.
A beautiful place to start, bro. Ai, yeah, no mawa ko tōku teina, te onore nui. It was a real honour for me and my little bro to be whāngai by Nan and Koro on my dad's side. I hail from the beautiful river city of Wanganui, and what we lacked in Pūtea with Nan and Koro was more than made up with aroa. And opportunity is probably the best way to describe it. Like anything my little bro and I wanted to do was always encouraged, and in retrospect now, when I look back at that upbringing, I feel really lucky to have been brought up with my nan and koro. At the time, I was like, they're really strict, you know?
Yeah.
But it was really full of love and wānau, like weekends at the marae and at the homestead with my cousins, who I thought were my cousins because they're the same age group, but they're actually my uncles and aunties, you know. That was part and parcel of our upbringing, that real sense of, you know, being outside and being in amongst te taiao and eeling and fishing and era momo are things that I don't see perhaps so much in this generation of tamariki. So I feel really blessed when I talk about my childhood. It was also, I feel, if we're talking about planting seeds, where I saw a lot of ill health. I was brought up with the younger brothers of my dad, and one of my uncles suffered from schizophrenia, and I thought it was normal to go and visit. There was an institution just outside of Wanganui called Lake Alice. It's closed down, and lots of controversy behind that. and we'd go and visit him there or in jail because he was always in and out of jail. So that was normal for me. I just thought, oh, everyone does that. It wasn't until I grew up and realised far out there was actually it shaped the way that I saw health and well-being, especially mental health and well-being. And at times, my brother and I would feel really safe with him. Like, if I'm being honest, and I hope my uncles and aunties aren't listening, but he was my favourite uncle. He was delicious and warm and generous and hearty and would give you his last dollar. But then the flip side of that with schizophrenia is that he'd lose it and you were walking on eggshells around him. So I feel like that shaped my fight or flight mechanism in my nervous system. So I'm always on edge or looking for danger, or especially because I was brought up with my little bro, I was like
protective.
So I became that kind of person within our whānau, always protecting and looking out. And
this is all happening without you knowing truly what was happening, because you said retrospect, eh? And so you're adapting to the environment, you're adapting to whānau, but was the feeling of knowing that arato taina, was that always at the front of your mind first and foremost, like, I got to look after my brother? And so were you just developing the skills to be able to do that, but your environment was teaching you all of these things?
It's a beautiful way to describe it. Absolutely. I feel like that sense of protectiveness and wanting to serve and be there for someone, like my little brother really was formed when I was young, I remember on Thursdays, uncle would, Imati, by the way, about 23 years ago, he passed away, this uncle that I'm speaking about. And I still have this utter love whenever I go back to Urupa. I used to have this big afro. Everyone in town knew him. He had this, he was distinguishable if he was coming down the road. And lots of people showed up at his tangi and expressed their love for him. But there, were circumstances that shaped who I ended up becoming in the way that I was quite reactive as I grew up as especially coming into adulthood. Every Thursday he'd get paid and then he'd have to give some rent to my koro. Sometimes he wouldn't. And we were always like, what's going to happen? So my koro was quite strict and, would kick him out and te mea. So my little bro and I would like huddle and do karakia. Like, please make sure that something doesn't happen. And I remember times where I'd jump over the fence and call the police because there was about to be a huge fight between my uncle and my koro, or if other uncles were involved in it. It was like this scene. And like I said, it became normal. And that can only but shape the way, those tools that you gather along the way of, koe hiningaroa is like really sharp and prepared, and then ended up studying law because I didn't want anyone else to go to jail now. Wānau. I don't want anyone else to be in trouble. And prepared is the best way. I had some skills, and one of them was definitely protecting my bro and making sure that he was never hurt.
Or in danger, in the sense.
Or in danger.
It's interesting how we can have retrospect and look at these aspects of our upbringing, and the key word that I also heard in there was how it shapes. It shapes us into who we are. And, that level of care, that level of protection is still very much there for you. And it's maybe there for whānau, but you sort of also have a view of, it doesn't matter where you are, it doesn't matter what background it is, everyone deserves to be looked after. Is that something that you feel is there for you? Is that transferred in that way?
100%. It's no coincidence I've ended up doing what I'm doing right now. And that's where I feel it started. 2 points. One is this interest and real wanting to know and get to the bottom of what makes us tick, and especially when it comes to mental health. Yeah? Having seen that from the outside and viewed that through my uncle's experiences back then. And the second thing is, definitely that wanting to be of service was driven by other things, this sense of wanting to be of service, and I call it toxic fuel, which maybe we'll talk about a little later on. But yeah, it definitely started when I was younger. The sense of wanting to be of service, wanting to help, wanting to protect came from a young age, and interest in mental health from a young age as well.
It's quite there's a lot going on within observation, particularly when you're developing, and if we have any interest in unpacking ourselves, there seems to be a lot of our development in those early stages.
Yeah.
And so the conditioning, the belief systems, the thoughts we have about ourselves and the world, how we receive love, what we need to do to keep safe, like all of these things are firing off without us even putting any conscious thought to it. And so that's our base, that becomes our foundation to then start to interact, engage, and move throughout adulthood. And so there's a lot of things to unpack there. But you having, I guess, that experience and learning from it, and then it reinforcing, man, this is something that I further want to do in these later years. You know, it's beautiful to use it as a way to fuel you rather than something that can pull you down. Because if we have that perspective of, no, fuck, my upbringing was da-da-da-da-da-da, and it has that kind of hold on you, we can never really, and to be fair, there are many people who have different kinds of circumstances and they make what it is that they do with it. Some people have had unfortunate circumstances and they've gone out to do great things. Others have had unfortunate circumstances and have struggled to do great things. But then we come on this other side, people have had great upbringings and they still struggle to do great things. And so what I'm also speaking to, it isn't the look of where things are at, but it's more so the feeling about oneself. It's the feeling 100%. About, you know, you can have all the success, but if your past or your upbringing or things that have happened still have a hold on you, you can't fully enjoy that because there's something that is there that is prohibiting you from experiencing that. And so when I hear you, you know, that is what comes to mind for me.
Oh, bro, you're so right. And to one of those points that you put on the table is, I think about, you know, my brother and I had the exact same experiences growing up, and the way that I responded to them was the complete opposite almost to him, and that the only way that we're here alive, he would have described it the same. We used to talk about this, is that I ended up going that way and he ended up going that way. And I remember going home to Tangi, and we were older, and one of our aunties who lived overseas was like, is that Milton? Is that Jason? Are they they're the bros, eh? Like from being whangai babe. She couldn't believe that we just like, he looked like a gangster, and but I loved my brother right up into the moment he took his last breath, because beyond that facade, which ended up being a way of protecting himself, like he looked tough, you wouldn't want to go with him, was this beautiful heart, and that was our hononga. Mai te timatanga, that was our hononga. He knew I got you. I got you was always my kupu to him, even when I lived over in Australia. And that's so, you know, to what you were speaking about before, you know, the same experiences growing up in life, but end up going in two different directions. People ask me, why did you go that way? Yeah. It came down to, I would say, you know, on top of all those things you were speaking of, your experience of life, but also your belief systems, ira momo. One person in each of our lives was the turning points, all it took. I call it pivot points. Mine was my 6-year-old teacher. Miss Watts, Miss Watt listening, shout out to you. She was at my 50th birthday this year, brother. I wanted to bring her to my 50th birthday, invite her and tell her to the world, there's 3 people that have shaped my life and shifted it in different directions. She was the very first one. I remember her buying me and my little bro, because like I said, we didn't much putia. You're probably too young to remember this, brother, but there used to be these shoes called karate shoes. And they were like slip-on shoes. You could buy them at I don't even know if it was the warehouse back then or Farmers or something, for like $11. She bought them for me and my bro because we didn't have shoes. And that to me was like, we were talking about this before in our kōrero. This woman sees me. This woman believes in me. I remember her looking, I can still see her face and smell her perfume because of this really distinct perfume. At 6 years old, that feeling that you were talking about, I felt her aroha for me. She was like, don't even let anyone tell you that you can't do anything. Oh, still years later, that's 6, 44 years later, that hits me here. Conversely, my little brother had someone say to him, that's dumb, not you're dumb, that's dumb. How do you interpret that as a young kid, ne? We both identified when we were adults talking about this.
The pivotal points.
Started then. So my key message is, and especially in our mamae, is be careful with your kupu. Ne, he mana tō te kupu. There's lots of mana in kupu, so you choose the right kupu, especially if you're speaking to tamariki, especially if you're speaking to rangatahi.
It shapes a lot of their view of themselves, and it might even just reinforce what they already think at times. Because we all doubt ourselves. We all, particularly when I think about me as a youngster, you're always trying to fit in, finding your niche, feeling like, oh man, I can't do. We judge ourselves so much because we want to be cool. We want to be in. And so any kind of reinforcement in anything that says or not, whether, it's being bullied, whether it's being picked on, whether it's a teacher saying something, it does have a dramatic kind of effect on you. And so e tika o kōrero nei, he mana tā te kupu. And so being able to be more intentional with how we speak. If you don't have anything nice to say, there's no reason to say it. And if you don't have anything nice to say, create the space for it not to be received in a way, but for it to be received how it's meant to be received. And that's an art in itself. And that's the space that you're in. But before we move into that, I'm really keen to talk about toxic fuel. What is that? Let's bring that back to the fore.
Good listening, brother. I've had the real privilege of being on this earth, tinana, for 50 years, and so I've had the experience of noticing, looking back at my behaviours and the stuff. At my 40th birthday 10 years ago, one of my best mates, Bella Karolo, said to me, what are you good at now? I was gobsmacked. I'm like, what? She goes, what are you good at now? It's like you do something and then you not only be good at it, but you're the best at it or best in New Zealand at it. Or I'm like, whatever. I'm like, what are you saying? She's like, I'm not dissing you. That's not but you move on to the next thing. And that, I suppose, was an introduction to this latest diagnosis that I've just had of ADHD, of being able to hyper focus on something and in these circumstances do really well. And it comes from when Dad left and gave us to his parents to be brought up. My brother and I had this really unhealthy hatred for him. One of my other memories is this beautiful photo of us at the back of our marae in Mangaihu. Me and my little bro, I'm 6 and he's 4, and it's at a tangianga, so it's a sad occasion, but we're smiling from ear to ear. Somehow, for some reason, I got my shirt off. I don't know why, but it must have been a summer's day. I remember that photo because it was the day that Dad arrived and had brought his new family. And it didn't make sense to me because he left with them. He'd remarried, and we now have a stepbrother, stepsister, and a half-sister. And I hadn't seen him, by the way, for 4 years. And my brother hadn't seen him since he was born. He was born and handed over to Nan and Koro. They're his parents too, by the way. And then he didn't take us. So we're like, what the hell's going on? How come we can't be part of that family? I share that because that's I suppose the beginning of that sense of I'm not worthy, that sense of I'm not enough, that sense of I'm unlovable. And you times that by 10 for my little bro, because he's like, what? This fella who I thought was my dad's not even taking me and Jason with him and his new family. And that day was that feeling of unworthiness was exacerbated because our stepbrother and sister showed us their new shoes. So we're like, what the? That sense of unworthiness just became a part of both mine and my brother's MO. When you don't feel worthy, there's two ways that can go. You either believe it and it cripples you, so you live into that, or it fuels you. And that's what I mean by toxic fuel. It becomes this thing that fuels me.
It's like you have to prove something.
100%, that always seeking validation. Bro, I was an entertainer and I'm owning this. This is my story, so it might not be the same for other entertainers. I chose to be excellent in a career that was all about showing instant worth. And I look back at that and go, I mean, I got to do amazing things, was in The Lion King in Australia, era momo, beautiful things, but also it was, from that place of being fueled by a toxic need to seek validation that was outside of me. So my healing journey, it's been all about how can I nurture that seed within me of aroha, that seed of self-manaki, that seed of self-belief, of self-worth.
That can only ever be fueled from within me.
No.
And that's your healing journey. It's been, there's been this journey of using that fuel, but it's been directed in the wrong kind of areas, whether that's, being in that industry, receiving the acknowledgement, the instant gratification, whatever it may have been. And it feels like a dopamine hit. It feels good in that moment. But when that's not happening, you've probably gone back into a different state. Was that a roller coaster that you felt you were in?
You nailed it. You explained that really beautifully. And then you go, well, where's that dopamine hit? For me, it was alcohol. For me, it was unhealthy habits, and in our wānau, and lots of Māori wānau, we have, my mum was, recovering drug addict and alcoholic. So it's in my DNA. And to look from the outside in, and people still say this to me, which I'm okay with now because I'm okay with it myself. They're like, you're all put together. You look put together. But if you peel back the layers of who someone really is, and that's why I've always had a bugbear. I've always found social media hoha, and sometimes a koha, because that thing that people see of me on social media is only a part of me, or a part of that pūrākau that's relevant for me at that time when I post that thing. But no one knows what's behind that. No one knows my hiding unless you've done rangahau or anything like that, or you know me, or you've watched a podcast or interview or anything that I've done. And so it's really nice to be able to share all those parts of me that once upon a time I used to be really shameful of.
Yeah.
And so going back to that, using alcohol as a way, people would look and go, oh, no, he's just having a good time. He doesn't have an issue. I did. It became my
Vice.
yeah, that crutch, that, oh, there's no more dopamine anymore. I'll drink my body weight's worth in alcohol. And it wasn't that I drank every day. It was just that I didn't know when to say to stop. I'd still be that guy at the bar shouting everyone, just met you, bro, you want some shots? Looking at my bank balance the next day going, where the hell did all my money? You know.
That's the cycle, eh? I resonate with that. I've had like a really interesting relationship with alcohol, and I also feel there was parts of my journey that I hadn't reconciled, and so the shame element was definitely there, where I would try and run away from that version of myself by trying to do good things.
Yeah.
Do good things, but it always caught up. It wasn't until I looked at those areas of my life and had a bit of a awhi with that version that enabled me to accept, that that's me, that's part of my journey. And the alcohol kaupapa, because I went alcohol free for 4 years because it was what I felt was limiting me at a certain stage of my life. And it wasn't to say that it was just alcohol, but it was what I did when I was under the influence, is that I didn't feel good about those experiences. And so I went without alcohol. Then I started drinking again. And then the first night I drank after 4 years, everything that could go wrong went wrong. And so it was a major learning curve for me. But what I've now realized is that every time that I made a mistake after that 4 years, I've actually been able to learn from it. And so my relationship with alcohol is a lot more controlled. I'm more aware. I know who I can be a version of Rands with, with my close mates. I can just be flamboyant. I can just take the piss. But in other settings, I just dial it all the way back in, and so I just have that awareness now. But I guess the topic around alcohol, where are you at with that now? Like knowing that was a way that when you had those low points of feeling unloved or feeling unworthy, and then you'd reach for the alcohol, when did that relationship with alcohol change? Did you have to go without it? Did you recognize it? Like, what was it there for you?
Pātai pai tēnā. It just got more and more of a coping mechanism. I'd find I'd need it. That was the first indicator. Oh, I'll just stop on the way. I lived in town when we first moved back from Australia. Me and my husband, we lived like literally there were 3 bottle stores within a block of us. On the way home, I'll just get a bottle, started like that. And then it came to a head when I'd have blackouts all the time. I'd get home and to get a text the next day from your mates going, are you all okay? Did you get home all right? Have you got all your things? That's an indicator. But then I'm like, oh, that's a good night, got all my things, didn't lose anything apart from my day because I'm in bed because I'm so sick, hungover. And then actually, bro, I just stopped. I remember being in Hanmer Springs, my husband who had a gig down there, and saying, I think I'm going to give up for a month. Really, it just started as a month, and then I recognised all the hua, ne? And it was beautiful. I'm like, saving money, clear my hinengaro, like, that was the biggest hua, I would say. It was like, wow.
Clarity in mind.
Ana. And that just kept going. And I was like, I'll try 3 months and then 6 months and it was a year. And I got to a year going, oh, well, I've been amazing and saved so much money. But more than the money, just like I felt like what's the word?
Felt a deeper connection to self, eh?
Kia ora. And mana. That sense of real mana had returned or was returning. My Māori was consistent. Not... And, you know, alongside that, I had a yoga studio, so it felt good to be that walk. We were talking about this earlier, to walk the talk rather than show up to a Saturday morning class hoping no one would smell my breath of alcohol. And it's a heated room, so it just kind of like highlighted those scents. And I'd have mates in the front row of my yoga class going, big night, you know, e hara tērā I te mea pai. And then it just became a lifestyle, and my husband is a chef, and so loves to pair wine. Like, doesn't drink very much at all, so that was also an encourager for me. Like, he doesn't drink, so it was easy to not be around alcohol ne. But does loves to pair a wine with good kaya for out for dinner. And
that must be an experience, man. I've always looked at people who are able to just know, okay, this would be good with that, you know, and it must just take the eating experience or the occasion just to another taumata.
Aye, taumata ke. Well, I just look at his eyes and I feel like I'm living vicariously through him when he does that. And we're going to Italy and Paris at the end of the year for Harare, and the thing he's looking forward to is that, matching the wine. So I'm like, well, I'll live that through you. I mean, that's enough for me. I don't need it. I was even, my mate who's on this sobriety journey for herself said to me, when was the last time you thought about having a drink? And I was like, even in the darkest times, one of those times was last year. In the past, it would have been, yeah, man, go for it. But that wasn't even an option. It wasn't an option, so...
You've developed the strength to be able to sit in it, eh?
Ai, kia ora.
To sit in the challenge, not escape the challenge, eh?
Mate of mine said that to me. She's like, you like that place, that uncomfortability. Oh, God, bro. I used to hate it. Anything, avoid it. Anyway, where's the exit, you know? Yeah.
And so, you know, that's part of the healing journey was, you know, through understanding the relationship with alcohol wasn't a good one. And so what are some of the other experiences around your healing journey that have helped, you know, outside of that? Because it would have been like a domino effect, eh? Because for me, when I took alcohol out, then I started doing this, then I went into that, I was around different people, I was thinking different about myself, so it became like a domino effect when the enabler of a lot of challenges in my life just wasn't there anymore. I had more energy to give to things I could sit in within myself. And so what was the next domino for you within that?
Yeah, kia ora. I feel like I've been on this hiding of Hauora, you might say, for 32 years. And at first it was very tinana based, working Village Mills and that.
Were you an instructor?
Yeah, I used to train teachers around the world, which was a beautiful part of my life, and came at a time where, you know...
Was that their body aerobics kind of...
Body Jam. It was
Body Jam.
It was like
that's
a dance-based program.
Yeah.
No, it was... I mean, it was...
those, though. I remember those.
It was really joy. So, like, I feel honoured that I was part of a tima that got to do that around the world. And so it was very tinana based near. And my kind of journey to kind of jump into this real healing process came 23 years ago in 2001 when my uncle had just passed, that one that I was speaking about. And I was doing a show in South Africa and Kay had to come home because I was really tired. Travelling that same show, was doing a tour around Aotearoa. And I, just long story short, ripped my Achilles. before that, to'u. I had a sty on my eye. I was deaf in one ear. I had cold sores all around my mouth. Like, how many to'u do you need to say, bro, you need a rest?
That toxic fuel running out, bro.
Bro.
That toxic fuel running out.
Mapo care. The fuel.
You're just fumes.
And I remember going to the doctor, and the doctor saying to me, whatever you are doing, you just stop. You need to go home and you need to rest. I'm like, nah. I was went to work. That was the night that I did my Achilles. Another pivot point, because I wasn't aware, wasn't listening to my tinana giving me signs, you're breaking down, what's going on. It was that your words just running on fumes. And then my healing process for that was, my physio said to me, go and do yoga. You love moving your body. It's a low impact way of healing your Achilles too, so go and do it. And I remember my first yoga class was at Les Mills in Tamaki. And I was standing next to this woman who was like really ethereal. Like, she would have been about 60, like real in her zone, yeah.
Goddess-like.
Aye. And I just remember, choice. I want to be like that kind of thing. And in I haven't discussed that sense of worthiness, there's also the super competitive aspects that I have. And so Auntie was doing her yoga and she was like putting, moving her body. I was basically next to going, competing with her. I was like, I'll show you.
She doesn't even know you exist.
No, she was in her own world doing her thing. I was like, and then the teacher, Mandy White, who's a good friend now and still teaches yoga up in Auckland, she was teaching the class and she came past me. The class is packed and was talking to me, but to the class, and put her hand on my shoulder as she passed me. It was like, and sometimes you just don't need to try so hard. Mic drop.
Yeah.
I just went to my knees. It was like she was talking directly, my tupuna were talking directly to me through her. Brought to my knees literally to child's pose. And in that moment, I'm like, up to?
That's what was going through my head. What are you up to?
Anna. Like, what are you up to and why? And that really started my journey of unpacking, looking. I'm going to use the word searching too. Because in that, that A-type personality of needing to prove, I dove into it like it was something to be achieved. Read every single self-help book that was out there and I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it so well. Like, again, bro, up to. And again, that's that retrospective thing. I can look back at that and have a giggle and go, oh, okay, but it also was the amount of mamae that was within me that I had to
process.
Heal from. And so I searched for things outside of me to help me. And that's a great way to kind of start the journey. Because I'm from the era, I remember, where my little bro and I were taught by koro, suck it up. Don't cry, I'll give you something to cry about. So didn't understand emotions, like just the basic ones, anger, sadness, happy. And everything else, stuff it down. I can't even remember crying. I cried on my knees, when I was in that yoga class going, it was the biggest, most beautiful release and relief. Like, far out, I got to start this journey now of healing. So I dove into things like yoga, mindfulness and meditation. Tried all the things. Healing bowls, ira momo. And nothing really seemed to, what's the word, resonate, like really pierce my heart until I came home. And that to me was like we were talking about, for my words, homecoming literally, because then I started learning te reo or relearning te reo. I started learning whakapapa. I healed my relationship with my father. I met my mum for the first time, because everyone goes, well, what happened to mum because you were whanga by nene koro? I never met her until 10 years ago when I came back to New Zealand. Reconnected, like really reconnected with my little bro and my nephews and nieces who I'd been absent from because I was living in Australia. Remember my niece saying to me, oh, famous uncle's home. And I just remember feeling really shame about that, like thinking, oh, what I heard was disconnected. So that all those beautiful modalities of yoga and mindfulness, ira momo, amazing. They were what I needed back then, but really what it was, my healing. If you were to ask me what's the biggest healing modality for you, Jase, reo. And tini āhuatanga no ngā tupuna hei oranga mō mātai ngāi Māori.
Tāhua, the journey of reconnection, of remembering, of reigniting, it's all of that, and home has the rongoa. Home has the rongoa for that, going back to your whānau, going back to your origins. There's a essence, there's a Māori, that's always going to call, that's always going to, yearn for you to return. And so, for you to have that experience and for it to be, provide, because if you're living away for so long, the hardest thing would be coming back.
Yeah.
Because you know what you're coming back into. You're coming back into a sense of a version of yourself that took you to Australia in the first place.
Kia
And so, finding the strength to be able to come back and having that higher purpose and all of the things that you've gone through, reconnecting with mama, man, that's beautiful. And the other thing that comes to mind, which I feel is a strong kaupapa of yours, is around, the sense of experiences of like discrimination. Like where have you experienced that because of the person that you are or things that you've done, and we all have had it in some shape, way or form, but have there been experiences where you've had to work through it, or has there been experiences where you feel as though it's been too heavy,
Kia ora. Yeah, that discrimination is everywhere. Hey, quite often I would, like when I was teaching yoga and before I came home, I was at yoga festivals as the only Māori and sometimes the only Kiwi because I was living away at these international festivals. That was back then, yeah? That was like 12, 13 years ago. And I'd been used to that because when I was at school, I won a scholarship to go to this, my words, Pākehā school. And there were only 3 Māori, and the other 2 were my best mates, still are to this day. So I've always felt othered, and I've always felt, which only just exacerbates that sense of I'm not worthy. I remember at school another, to your point around, someone might do something or say something, and in this particular instance, this woman wasn't even saying it to me, but it just reinforced what I already believed about myself.
About yourself, that's right.
She was saying to her son as we're going to chapel at the school, he doesn't deserve to be here. So, like I said, you can either go this way or that way with that sense of my self-belief of I'm not worthy. And I was like, I can show you, lady, And that's that toxicity of that fuel that was, keeping me going. But as I shared, that runs out after a time. Discrimination comes in the form of like I've been in places and spaces where I'm the token Māori, or I'm the... Even at wellbeing conferences, I'm going to say, and even just lately, brother, where I'm the mental health guy, kind of put in a time where probably not many people are going to go, but they end up being the busiest sessions. And that to me is, I've been okay with that. I've learned to build a resilience to that kind of whakaro from, because that's on them. It's on other people. What can I own in that? My great auntie from Aotearoa is Tariana Turia, and she knows about othering. She knows fully about what it's like to be the only Māori sometimes at the tepu or in the ruma. I remember her saying to me, Jase, you have to very quickly get comfortable with being the only Māori, that discrimination, or in my case, because the ma'i that I do, the only person that's there to talk about mental health. And because I talk about mental health to do with our Māori as well, there's a kind of double thing there. Get used to that. And the quicker you can get used to that means that she's all about legacy. In 5 years' time, if you're the only Māori there right now, you're paving the way for 5 more. So, in other words, it's not about you. It's about the kaupapa, ne? Ko te kaupapa te mea mātua.
It's so mean to hear that, because, you know, when, like, the way I look at discrimination is, you know, judgment, or, you know, people passing whakaaro or trying to put you in a box, or othering, as you sort of say. But to be able to know that that's what's happening, and people are doing it without even saying it sometimes. It's like the whakaaro is just penetrating and it's being projected, and you can just feel it, you know. You walk into a room and you just feel it. No one's saying nothing, but you just know what they think.
It's these ones.
It's the But the muscle you build, being able to still be in those rooms, occupy that space, it reaffirms that. Like what I see within that is, when there's, like, I'll use myself as an example. When you're trying to be someone different than what everyone has always known you as, you might walk into a room, there's Rands who's this, and this and that. But you're trying to be a new version of that. And so you're different. And that's what I feel within this journey of growth is, or changes, or being a new version of yourself, is that not only are you trying to prove to yourself that you are different in the way you hold yourself, the way you think about yourself, the way that you believe about yourself, but you're also battling against how other people perceive you based on how they've always known you.
Kia ora.
And so, you know, you're getting it not only from yourself, but you're getting it from others. But every time you stand within those spaces and you continue to occupy it, not only are you reaffirming your own belief within yourself, but you're also changing everyone's perspective of how they are going to see you moving forward. And that's what I feel around, you know, the development in the muscle of our belief in knowing that everyone's going to have their whakaaro, but at the end of the day, are they going to pay your bills?
Kia ora.
Are they going to look after your kids? Are they going to look after your whānau?
Let them have that too.
Yeah.
That's theirs. I'm good at handing that back.
What does that look like to you, like in terms of handing that back? Like,
sometimes if I'm feeling real cheeky because I'm cheeky, I'll go, I'm going to leave that with you, bro. You know, thank you for your whakaaro, but, you know, those are yours. And sometimes. Or I'll just, I'll just say, I hear you. That's that validation. I hear your whakaaro, but also not having to feel like, that's the other thing. I used to get really defensive. And I'd be like on the defense of, I remember going to a friend of mine passed away and they had this memorial. It was very Pākehā. Me and my mate were the only Māori in the room. It was in Wellington. And I'd just come from teaching a yoga class from my studio around the corner. So I was in the back and the guy who was organising it was like, you know, very, trying to choose my words, needed things done in a certain way, let's put it that way. And I was getting change and he was having me on about being late. I said, I was told it was at da-da-da. Anyway, there was raru, and already there was that mode of, And I find that hard. I have to really, it's an example of I'll leave that with that person and I'll just stay tau. And he was like, have you got your speech? I said, yeah, I do. He was like, oh, well, do you want to put it on a projector? I was like, oh, no, because it's here. And he just looked me up and down, and I really felt like in that small exchange, you really get to know, when you start to tune into yourself and become self-aware, you get to really see other people's mamae. And my big practice at that time was not to take that on and make that mine, or be triggered into my stuff that might be a mirror that they're reflecting back to me.
And this is all happening in the moment, eh?
Yes.
You know, like you're getting it, it's happening so quick, you know, we're talking about it like it's a stage thing, but it's actually all happening all at once, eh? Like you're getting the energy, you're getting the feedback, and then all of a sudden everything switches on. Okay, and you're thinking, okay, I need to regulate, like where's this coming from? Okay, I don't need to own this. Like it's happening in like a few seconds.
I'm coaching myself in my own heads. That's what my therapist says to me. So you got really good at regulating because you're coaching yourself. Do you recognize, going back to our initial kōrero, bro, around that you had to do that for yourself with your bro?
Yeah.
And so this has become a tūmataro, a superpower, a magic gift that you have now. And it's both healing for you and maybe it was, because I took a breath, and and the bro goes, oh yeah, let's take a breath. And did it himself, but I was just doing it for my own self, and he was like, yeah, let's take a breath.
He just jumps in.
Yeah. And then he goes, oh, so you're just going to talk off the cuff? I said, yeah. I really love her, so I can speak really freely about that. I had this big speech on a piece of paper. What was beautiful was that I saw him ditch it. Halfway through his speech, he ditched it. And I'm like, oh, that's really nice. I wonder if, and again, this is in reflection, I wonder if our little exchange has something to do with him to reconnect to his ngākau and speak from his ngākau rather than very hinengaro world that he lives in. Yeah, who knows?
Wow, that's so cool, you know, and one of the cool things, I guess, within that is, you know, being able to connect within the moment, and the breath is such a powerful tool for that. And when we're talking about mental health, a lot of mental health probably happens, and you'll probably know more about this, is because we're in our head too much. And so how are we able to find moments or pockets where we can disengage from our hinengaro by using the breath, you know, whether it's going out into the taia, whether it's going out by the moana, whether it's just being with friends, you know, it's being in spaces that can, and it's not a distraction. It's not a way to distract yourself from mental activity, but it's doing something that you know you want to do, and it's cup filling. And as we start to wrap up this kōrero, Jase, you know, you're part of Hauora Aotearoa, you know, which is your organisation, and you do a lot of mahi o rangatahi kura throughout the motu. I just want to give it over to you to speak about, you know, that mahi and how important it is to you.
Kia ora. What I feel is a real privilege to be able to share. My nan said to me, if you learn something that heals you, share it. And koina tāku I whai ai. I really followed that. Not instruction. I don't feel like it was an instruction from her, but I feel like it was like an offering. And I take that
invitation.
Kia ora, and I really take that on because I'm healing, a work in progress of myself, and you know, with the privilege, I used that kupu before because I feel like it has been on this earth for 50 years. I really truly only feel, bro, that I'm just getting started in my life. I feel like I've got
you don't look 50, bro, I'll tell you that much.
Bless you. Bless you. It's the Māori magic.
It has to be.
We black don't crack, they say, which I
don't crack.
It just gets wider. wider. But I and that's what our kaupapa is this beautiful whānau of facilitators that I have, and I know you're a facilitator, and know that real you use this word, I really love that responsibility ne, of holding space, creating space, where our rangatahi can come, this is what our kaupapa does, to find tools themselves, that real our space is a place where our rangatahi can find tools for themselves. We use that word empowering. I really truly believe in empowering our rangatahi, especially rangatahi Māori, who are most of the kids that we work with. Find tools to be able to navigate their way through life, to know where they are at any given day. They are where they're at, today I feel, real pōuri, and then understanding why perhaps. But here's the icing on the cake, is to also know what to do from there. What I love, if we're speaking about hua, is that at the end of our kaupapa, they go get to share that with tamariki at local kohanga or local early childhood centres. So it's that tuakana taina teaching. It's the last part, I believe, of the learning process is when you teach it, that's when it really lands. Ne?
Integrates.
And that is really where all the hua come. You get to see our rangatahi standing in their tino rangatiratanga, truly in their mana, in their tuakiritanga, that sense of coming home to themselves. And that, for me, I feel it's what I've been put here to do. I feel like all of what I've gone through in my life and what I've shared with you has just paved the way. I get toi from tūpuna, like, this is what you're here to do, boy. Kei o ringa, I hear them say. Ngā koingo o mātou. Our dreams are in your hands. So mahi te mahi.
That's beautiful. I feel, the mahi that's been done within the rangatahi space is a space that needs to be nurtured, and creating the space first and foremost for rangatahi, but then giving them the checkpoints to be able to then reflect and surface what they already know, because they've got it, man. Like, I've been talking to a lot of friends recently, and just how, I just had a podcast with Te Hāmua, and he was talking about how ko ngā rangatira mo a pōpō, but it's our pōpō right now. Or inaia, like, we're already there. There's rangatahi already doing amazing things, hana rāwhiti pumping, leading the way, and so there's great examples. Honestly, they could go to Matatini.
I was like listening, going, oh my gosh, you could be in Ngā Tumanako, Yeah, you're right.
And so they got it, but it doesn't disregard a lot of challenges that are still happening for our rangatahi, coming from dysfunctional whānau, homes, parents, whatever that may be. Like, that's still something that is still very challenging for our rangatahi. And so it's to identify that, but not to always focus on that, but to focus on what is the narrative that would be helpful for them to navigate through this. Because I look at things that I've gone through our my upbringing, you look at your things, and it's not until retrospect, like you said, it's not till you go through life a little bit, then you reflect, oh, that's why I went through this. Oh, this is what this represents for me now. And so in the moment, the rangatahi, you can learn from it and know exactly what's going on. But there are others who just need to experience life a little bit. And them experiencing life will then, the wawata or the hope is that they do find their way. But I just want to acknowledge you for the mahi that you're doing, the journey that you've taken us on in this kōrero. You've gone through so many different things and you've been able to start so many times, which I feel is a beautiful lesson for us, is that when we start, we might come to an end of that chapter and it's okay to start again. And in that chapter, we might go through some real life-altering experiences where we go into a space mentally. We might go through an experience, whether it's a breakup, losing mahi, finances, all of these have an impact on our mental health, you know, and that state where we go mentally is really challenging and creates a lot of distress as well. And so what I'm hearing through your kōrero is that it's okay to start again. When we start again, it's what did we learn? What are the tools? What are the modalities? What are the things can help us on our journey of oranga? And it's never anything that is outside of us, but if we can start to get familiar with the journey within and start that healing process or the empowering process or the self-belief or self-love, self-care, whatever that looks like, you're an example of that, Ewa. And so I just want to pass it over to you if you have any parting words for our listeners. Kei a koe te wā.
Tēnā rawa tuku. Tōtai ake, kei te parata, no I tuuira tēnei kāinga, tēnei ware puna pāo. Tēnā rawa atu koe mo tō ngā kaunui, ne? Me te manaakitanga anō o ke tuarua. Mō kua ke nei, me maita I tātou, e ai ki te wakatauki, me maita I tātou, ei oranga mō te katoa. Ai marika. Mō kua ke nei mō tā mātou kaupapa Hauora Aotearoa, me maita I tātou, ai oranga, mō te oranga o ngā tamariki, o ngā rangatahi anō, okay? They're not our tomorrow. They're our right now. And the more that we can do to empower our tamariki and our rangatahi with good well-being. I think Tā Mason-Jury, who beautifully gifted us our name of Hauora Aotearoa for our kaupapa, says it beautifully. If you're able to live well, learn some tools to be able to be well, healthy, holistically, te ware tapawa, then you can learn well. You're in a space. Some of our kids aren't even ready to learn when they get to school. So our kaupapa nurtures them, plants seeds for them to be able to be just ready to learn. And then when you're ready to learn the next stages, then you can step into your leadership, into your tino rangatiratanga. And that's what we're seeing. And that's happening right now. Yeah, thanks so much for having me today, bro. We went on a haringa,
We did go on a haringa, bro, and beautiful words. Continue to do the mahi that you're doing. No doubt the whānau of listening have gathered, some gems that hopefully supports them with where they are, which is the intention of this podcast. And thank you for being a part of it and fulfilling that intention, but also being a part of this kaupapa. And so, kia koe tēnā koe, Aotearoa kia koutou e te whānau, tēnā koutou katoa.
Mai ora.
Kia ora.